Hi folks, so we're continuing looking at the origins of the Koran, and we're looking at Theodore Noldek's article, The Koran, which I wasn't particularly impressed with, really, to be honest. There was a few prejudicial statements against Muhammad, which I think were prejudicial, not grounded in any real scholarship. But what we've been doing in this is taking some of the comments of the Koran and seeing what the Quran says. On the issue of the memory, that Muhammad was to memorize the Quran, we looked at the last video, Surah 87 verse 6 and 7, where it says God will help him to memorize but then forget. So there's a contradiction there. Will he memorize or will he forget? But in Bukhari 386 and Muslim 889, these are hadiths that are very important to some Muslims. We read that Muhammad did forget verses. So this chain of narration idea is just that that the Muslims passed on the Quran by memory is complete bogus, because Muhammad couldn't even remember his own Quran. You have in the Quran, Surah 53 verse 19. Surah 53 verse 19. Surah 53 verse 19. Have you really considered Al-Lat and Al-Uzza, and the third one Manat? What for you the males and for him the females? That indeed is an unfair division. These are nothing but names which you yourselves have devised, you and your forefathers. God has sent down no authority for them. They follow nothing but conjecture, what their own selves desire, even though guidance has already come to them from their Lord. So that's the satanic verses. Now we have sources in Ibn Ishaq and Tabari that quote as if it's original. Now the early sources of Islamic history are very dubious. So why would I accept Ibn Ishaq when he's quite dubious, and the early sources of Islamic history are quite dubious and not very reliable? Why would I accept the satanic verses? The simple reason why Tabari, who was a Muslim scholar in the Middle Ages, accepted it. You wouldn't put that in if you were a follower of Muhammad. Why would Ibn Ishaq put it in? He was a follower of Muhammad. He put it in because he saw it as being authentic. If some people are putting stuff in, of your supporters are putting stuff in, the historical material that is making their leader look bad, is probably likely true, as they wouldn't do it. In Surah 12:49, Surah 12:49, Surah 12:49, it says, then a year will come after that when the people will have abundant rain, and when once more they will press wine and oil. Now this scholar says this is a reference to Egypt, and it's talking about rain when Egypt was principally fertile by the Nile. So there's some geographical misunderstanding there. And in Surah 1882, the story about Alexander the Great is a story ripped from an earlier Syrian writer of the 6th century. So that's this particular scholar. Theodore Noldek was quite an influential, quite a great scholar, and he wrote quite extensive on the topic. Reading his article, I think he made some good points. I thought he made some really good points, but I think that sometimes he was guilty of subjectivism, where he was making just ad hominem criticisms of Muhammad without any real hard, solid evidence. but what I've done in the video before and here is just mainly not looked at his scholarship, but just picked some of the Quranic verses that he's mentioned, and then we've looked at the Quranic verses and looked at the claims of the Quran, and then debunked that and shown that that's just not good. Now, another article here in the Origin of the Quran is Uthman and the Recension of the Quran by Leon Keitani, and I'll link to this writer. Now, he wrote 10 volumes on the Hadiths and was quite an eminent scholar in his day. In this article, what's interesting is Ibn Warwick. There's no sources provided. This is apparently an eminent scholar, but there's no sources provided. I don't think that's a good thing. There has to be sources. There has to be evidence provided, and there's no evidence or sources provided, or very little. But having said that, I don't doubt this guy's integrity. I don't doubt this guy's ability as a scholar. Now, he makes a point that when I mentioned in the chapter, in the first video, about Ibn Warwick's article that about Abu Bakr making a Quran, he makes the point that he thinks it's mythological about Abu Bakr, that he believes it's Uthman who did the recension, and he has some questions. He says, if killing the companions in war endangered the Quran, why did Abu Bakr give the copy to a woman? So in other words, the story, the Hadith collection, and the generally story is that Abu Bakr made a recension because the people dying in battle, and he wanted the Quran to be remembered and not to be forgotten. Why would he do that? By putting the Quran in the hands of a woman. That a woman was given the Quran by Abu Bakr. That doesn't make sense. I think that was a very good question. He goes, if need 2 witnesses to verify a Quranic verse, that would imply forgeries. So this idea that there were 2 witnesses to verify each Quranic verse by Uthman implies that there were forgeries at the time. Now, I think personally that the idea of 2 witnesses is not historical. I think that's just made up. I've got cramp in my stomach. I think the 2 witnesses in the hadiths, that 2 witnesses verify a Quranic verse, I don't think are historical, and I need to do some research to show that is the case. So I don't accept this scholar's statement about the 2 witnesses. But he says if need 2 witnesses, it implied forgeries. So the fact that whether it was true they needed 2 witnesses to verify the Quran, or that some redactors, editors in the 8th century or 9th century put in the hadiths that there needs to be 2 witnesses, whichever side it's on, implies that there were texts that needed to be excluded. So there were forgeries around. So how do we know that those forgeries have not got into the Quran? Now, this scholar mentions that there were reading schools of recitators in the time of Uthman, and they were undermining the new Islamic empire. And he says that Uthman organized one recension to undercut these reciters and their theological influence of causing confusion in the Islamic empire. And that's in page 103 of Origin of the Koran by Ibn Warwick. No evidence is provided on that, but I think that I'm sure that there's some truth in it if we looked at it, and we need to look into it. I put here, we forget the political ramifications of the burning of the Quran. When you read in Bukhari the burning of the Quran by Uthman, it seems to be an isolated incident, but actually when you think about it, there were all these different Qurans around. So there was a political machinery that had to go around burning these Qurans, which shows you that there was a political influence going on in the production of the Quran. Alright. We'll leave it there. God bless you.